so this is Navy Pier right here. So this is where you guys will be the inventions. So that was a lot of fun. We actually had 2 world fairs here. One was the Columbia Exposition of 1893, and the other one was Century of Progress in 1933. And that was 100 years after Chicago was founded. Yeah, it was a great economic feature for Chicago. All right, yeah, I'll show. All right, so I'm gonna park right here for now. When you get.
So guys, right now we are heading to the boat ride, and you can see the queue. Yep.
Through the building, stabilizing pressure on the windward side of the building, and thus reducing building sway. This is one bedroom apartment. Nice ratio there. To $18.5 million for a 4-bedroom, 4-bath, 2-floor penthouse apartment near the top of the town. I don't know that guy. Now, the penthouse goes for about $18.5 million. So, and just so you know, there are about 80 unsold units in that building at the moment. So, if you're in the market for a nice little cozy spot here in Chicago, think about the lovely St. Regis as an option. Then next up on your left is another interestingly shaped building in the Swiss Hotel. The Swiss Hotel is this metal and glass triangular building here. And it's a triangular design by an architect named Harry Weiss. Harry Weiss, very influential architect a few decades ago, who loved triangles. He was obsessed with triangles. He put them into all of his designs pretty much. So if you're walking around Chicago, or maybe even later on this tour, you see another triangular shaped building, it's probably this same architect, Harry Weiss. But I love the trio of the 3 buildings here. You've got the triangular building, the boxy building next to it, and the wavy building behind it. And I think that's a great little introduction to the ways that buildings are always speaking to each other in these interesting little ways. Nowadays, you can always find connections between buildings, how they complement each other in terms of style, in terms of shape. And that's something that we'll talk a lot about today, about how buildings actually fit into their context, fit into their environment. They don't just stand alone, but form this larger woven tapestry of architecture that makes up an entire city. Now some Chicago facts for you. As of the 2020 census, there are 2.7 million people living in Chicago. 0.4 million live in the Chicagoland area. That's our fun name for our metropolitan area here, Chicago. That makes us still the 3rd largest city by population in the United States, behind New York and Los Angeles. And Chicago is the city on the lake. We have over 20 miles of lakefront, over 20 swimming beaches, 5,300 boat slips, and 10 harbors. And Lake Michigan is such a big part of the culture in Chicago. So much of what we do on nice days in the summer is centered on going to the lake, being by the lake. So I always like to plug it. If you're looking for a nice, simple activity to do in Chicago, the #1 thing I recommend for folks to do is go for a nice walk by the lakefront, go for a bike ride, rent a divvy bike, you can go rollerblading, you can sit out by the beach, and again, if you ever get too hot, you just jump right in. It's very, very refreshing. On your right, that lovely clock tower building is the Wrigley building. The Wrigley building was built in the early 1920s, about 100 years ago. And this is a style of architecture that we call Spanish Revival style. Spanish Revival style. We call it that because that clock tower was modeled after La Giralda, which is a cathedral in Sevilla, Spain. That clock tower you can see up there, very similar to what you can see in Spain. But there are 250,000 glazed terracotta tiles of cream and white. They're drawing your eye upward. Terracotta is a material softer than porcelain. Must be hand washed with soap and water. Now this is the same Wrigley as in Wrigley chewing gum, as in Wrigley field, and you might be asking yourself, corresponds to the height of this pointy tower that's right across the river, the Mathers Tower. And then that third patio, way up there, don't hurt your neck looking up, corresponds to the height of the black box building right behind it. Up, is polished Indiana limestone beige color. This was a style for the roaring 1920s, ornate, elegant, ostentatious. If each generation kind of takes its own value and expresses them in three dimensions through architecture. The merchandise art and Art Deco were expressing just the luxury and the optimism that was characteristic of the roaring 20s period. Now, those roaring 20s, they did come to a roaring halt, but I'll get to that a little bit later on, because we're about to enter one of my favorite spots in the entire river, one of the best photo ops on this entire river, and that's called Wolf Point, where you will be able to see nearly 360 degrees of pure glass skyscraper. Let's start over here on the left with the Nuveen Building, 333 Wacker. The Nuveen Building is another example of contextualism, because you'll notice this curved building mimicking the curve in the river. And the blue glass matches the blue of the sky, while the turquoise matches the green of the river. So that is contextualism as well. We're trying to blend in with the natural context, fit in with the natural features of the area, in this case being the river. And that is where Ferris Bueller's Day famously looked down on the way to the 80s Chicago documentary Ferris Bueller's Day. Straight ahead, Riverfront from 2017 with that spiraling red sculpture in front of it. Riverfront from 2017, many of the buildings currently surrounding you were built in the last 5 to 10 years. So this whole area that really transformed very dramatically in recent years. The Riverfront over here with those arches at the top, at the bottom, I have many customers telling me to pick up this little bit of those McDonald's pie boxes. I think it was more like a hot pocket, you know, take your pick. Now that archway at the bottom there has two functions. Number one, which is a really amazing rain gutter for the entire building. But number two, more importantly, it's so that the building's caissons, the foundations of the building, don't interfere with the Metro and Amtrak train lines running right underneath the building. Straight ahead though, this red building here is Fulton House. Fulton House is the oldest building still standing on the Chicago River. Built in 1898. It was originally a cold storage freezing building for the meatpacking industry. Meatpacking, one of our huge exports in the early 1900s. Meat. We were called at one point the hog butcher of the world. They would broad shoulders. They were very strapping meatpackers. They would bring barges of meat from the south side of Chicago, freeze them in Fulton House here, and then ship them to export across the country on trains, like the one they used to run the Maple Bridge right here. But meatpacking was starting to decline, and then by the 1970s, they turned the building into what you see now, which is condominiums. And they said that it took 4 months for this entire building to thaw out, because it was basically just this giant freezer with no windows for the better part of a century. And then when they were knocking down these walls, they thought they were filled to experts who were ready for scared. It's delicious. Classic way to eat. How does anyone smell chocolate? Okay, good. I'm not going crazy. There's a chocolate factory just a few blocks west of here called Palmer's. So on a nice and easy day like today, you can get some amazing chocolatey Palmer's. Just delicious. On your left though, there are river cottages. You notice these river cottages have a triangular design, right? And there's almost 4 looking windows. This is reminding me of a sailboat. So that's because the architect Harry Weeks, the triangle back, he loved to sail. He put nautical themes in many of his buildings. These building cottages back in the 1888, nobody not just in the design, because back in the 80s, nobody really wanted to live in the North Branch of the river that we are on now. The North Branch here used to be a smelly, gross, industrial branch of the river, but we believe that if you build it, they will come. If you build something beautiful, people will be attracted to it, respond to it. It was right just a few years ago, one of those cottages sold for $2.25 million. But you can see all the attitude towards the river over here on the right in the East Bank Club. The East Bank Club is a fancy fitness club. And it also looks like we're looking at the back of the building. That's because we are. It's almost like it's treating the river as its alleyway, turning its mountains down here now. Everyone wants to come live down in this North Branch of the river. This is transformed. this has transformed to one of the more desirable areas of the whole city. So the river has really bounced back in this major, beautiful, and beautifying way. Hello. Alright, so we're gonna make a little U-turn here. We're gonna head down to the South Branch where there's more amazing things to see, including the tallest tower in Chicago. Get a chance to visit our amazing bartender Hobby in the back, grab an ice cold drink, and I'll be walking around. Please, if you have any questions, historical landmark bridge, permanently raised in its exact upright position. And that shows you how a Chicago-style bridge works. You see this big hunk of concrete sitting underneath that bridge. That big hunk of concrete is what allows the bridge to swing up and down. It's called a trunnion bascule bridge. It's like a giant seesaw-like design. If you look behind you, you'll see that big concrete counterweight in even better relief. And that's how all of our Chicago bridges work. That's why we call them Chicago-style bridges. And that's a perfect example of how that works. But straight ahead, this beautiful glass building with that Y-shaped base almost looks a little bit like this giant pencil stuck into the ground. That is 150 North Riverside, 150 North Riverside from 2017. So that was the same year Riverfront, the other giant new glass building, was built in 2017. And these giant new glass buildings, which you can see quite a few of just in your field of vision right now, are a style of architecture that we're calling next-gen contemporary. Next-gen contemporary. Why do we call it? This style is so new, so contemporary. And next generation, we want to name it something much, much cooler. There's actually two new for us to really have a category here, but I don't think a little bit like the iPhone architecture. It is sleek, elegant, and it's minimalist on the outside, but jam-packed with cutting-edge technology, complicated engineering on the inside. And then this Y-shaped, what's called a cantilever design, is for two reasons. Number one, so that the building's caissons, again, those foundations of the building, that they don't interfere with the electric train line underneath the building. Number two, the city has an ordinance or rule for a 30-foot setback for a river walk for all the buildings by the river. This is super important for us here in Chicago. It's like our waterways, the river, the lake, open, free, and clear for pedestrian access for everyone to be able to run. As you can see on that side of the road, that river walk. So that's why it's got the Y-shaped design. And the base of that building, though, is amazingly only 39 feet wide. And it is very tall, so you're going to deal once more with building swing. And so to deal with that building swing, they use the technology. 160,000 gallons of water in 2021. This is the newest addition to the Chicago River. And they also had to deal with that 30-foot setback for the river walk rule. And they did so in a very creative way. They used these giant tripod legs to literally vault the building in midair. Those are huge steel I-beams taking on tons and tons of weight to suspend this building by its third floor, maximize all that office space, and create another lovely Riverwalk area. So I love this Riverwalk rule because I think in addition to creating all these pedestrian access ways, which makes Chicago such a walkable city, it also makes our architects and engineers work in these really creative ways to find innovative solutions like this one. But we are now going to jump into our little time machine because these next 5 buildings coming up on your right were all built in chronological order. So they really demonstrate the evolution of architecture, not only here in Chicago, but across the United States. First up on your right, you've got 2 Riverside Plaza. to Riverside, another example of Art Deco. You see the demons and windows, streamlined in Vienna limestone beige color, again, roaring 1920s. Now what happened though in 1929? This stopped working. Great crash. And we entered the Great Depression, and there's a virtual freeze on the building of office buildings from 1932 to 1957. That's about 25 years of no building in Chicago. But when we reboot architecture in the late 50s and 60s, we jump right into black box modernism, which you can see over here on the right in Gateway Centers 1 and 2. Black box modernism. The father of the black box was a man named Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe, very famous Chicago-based architect, who said that less is more. Less is more. So I think that there's an elegant simplicity to these black boxes. They are dark, stark, cheap, and easy to make. These buildings, they are more functionally beautiful instead of being all that aesthetically beautiful, right? But I mean, why build like this, you know? After we go for that fancier Art Deco style of the 20s and 30s, just building some simple squares on squares in the 50s and 60s. Well, this was the post-World War II generation of developers and architects. It was the post-Great Depression generation. These were people who were more naturally thrifty, who didn't want to waste money on big, fancy office buildings. They said that an office building is just a machine for people to work in. Let's just get in there, let's just get the job done, nothing too fancy. And that is exactly what they did. That's why they built over 60 of these black box modernist buildings in Chicago. And if you start to walk around the city, you'll notice these black boxes just all over the place. But jumping ahead to the groovy 1970s with the international style of Gateway Center 3. So in the 70s, as you can tell, we are still building boxes, right? But they now have a little bit more style in the form of precast concrete or stone cladding, and the buildings can even be, wow, white. How exciting. Holy color, there, fixed clear up there. We call this the international style. As you can see a building like that being built anywhere in the world in the 1970s, maybe even in your hometown. I really recommend going back to your hometown, to cities near where you live, to see if you can see some of these architectural trends taking place. Because I guarantee you, particularly if you do live in the US, you'll probably see some very similar things. The boxes, tired of the square thinking, they think the modernism style, man, boring, must be bolder, fresher, with style again. Thus, contextualism is born. You notice that this curve in the building mimicking the upcoming curve in the river, and there's a mirrored curve on the other side of the building. And that greenish color of the building is matching the color of the river in this particular spot. So again, contextualism, all about blending in with your surroundings, and also all about glass. Glass was kind of a new material to play with like this in the 80s and 90s. On your left, though, is a simple black box building that we never used to touch. And that made the owners kind of mad. So they spent over $800,000 to literally put themselves on the map. This is a giant. You are here, man, of the Chicago River. And that little red Lego piece up there, that represents this here on the Chicago River. So, you know, if you are ever lost in downtown Chicago, or you drop your phone in the river, and you look about this building, you know exactly where to go, right? But next up on your right is another enormous Art Deco building that you might recognize if you are a fan. Because this is where Heath Ledger's Joker robbed a Gotham City bank in the 2008 film The Dark Knight. If anyone remembers the movie, The Joker drives a bank. Chicago was actually the mail order catalog capital of the world. We had the likes of Sears department store here, among others. We needed such a huge post office to handle the ingoing and outgoing mail. But nowadays, that's no longer a post office. That is office space for companies like Lindbergh, Walgreens, PepsiCo. And just to give you a sense, there's a 3.5-acre rooftop park in that building with a basketball court and a bar. All those. Are you lucky? Must be nice. Now, as we sail down the lovely South Branch River, we're on the South Branch now. We are headed south. First of all, as we follow the South Branch to its conclusion, you would eventually reach as far as factors go. But it's not about the fire. We need to first separate the facts from the fiction. So I'm going to start with the fiction. This is the not true story. Not true. This is the myth, the legend, if Mrs. O'Leary's barn, so the legend goes. At this cow got very frustrated with Mrs. O'Leary and purposely kicked over a kerosene lantern which started the whole barn on fire and soon the whole city on fire. This cow, Mrs. O'Leary, are tried in court and found guilty of the greatest urban inferno of all time. Maybe that story to some of you might be familiar. Maybe somewhere along the way someone told you about a cow that started a fire. Well, I'm here to tell you that the cow part is not true. Now it is true that Mrs. O'Leary, she was a real person. She was an Irish Catholic immigrant. She did have a barn in Chicago. And it is true that she had a cow. And it is true that we even fire did start in her barn. But there is no proof whatsoever to put it on this cow for Mrs. O'Leary. And we don't know how the fire started. When they're at home, there's lots of theories out there. My favorite theory is that might have been a meteorite shower that she caused the fire. We don't know. They did. They officially exonerated Mrs. O'Leary and her cow very swiftly in 1997. So 125 years to this otherwise declared her name. Now here are the facts of the fire we do know. In the mid-1800s, Chicago's population is exploding with industrialization, jobs, and our building is trying to keep up with all the growth going. Around 9 p.m. on October 8, 1871, a fire started in Mrs. O'Leary's barn, which is located just a few blocks to your right, actually. Still in the road there. Now that fire had raged for 3 days. And the rebuilding of Chicago started the very next day. The very next day after the fire, hasn't been passed since. It was just 15 years of the fire. And a living Bavarian gentleman would build the very first steel frame skyscraper, the first true skyscraper ever, right here in Chicago. We would not be the same city we are today without this fire. The debris from that fire we used to build up our historic lakefront. We don't have that same beautiful 20 lakefront that we have today.
Castillo, the Miami, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, among other First Nations that have lived and continue to live in this area. There's still a very large name presence in Chicago. And the Potawatomi had a name for this land. There's a few different names, a few different languages. One of them was Chicagoa, which roughly translates to skunk onion. Because there was this garlic wild onion that used to grow along the banks of the river, and the onion was known for its very, well, you know, New York might be the Big Apple. Over here in Chicago, we are. Smelly onion. We are. Very proud of this. On your right, the glorious Civic Opera Building. The Civic Opera Building is the second largest opera in North America with over 3,500 seats. It is a giant Art Deco building. And it is currently the home to the Lyric Opera of Chicago. That is one of over 200 theater companies that call Chicago home. Chicago is a huge theater city, theater hub. I myself, in addition to being a tour guide, I'm also an actor. And I highly recommend seeing a play here, seeing live music, seeing a comedy show. We have really amazing live artists in Chicago, dance, you name it, we've got it. So do take advantage of that. Next up on your left is Boeing World Headquarters. Well, when this building was built in 1990, it was the headquarters of Morton Salt, the salt company. And if you look up at the top of this former salty building, you'll see there was 6 holes and those 6 vents. And that was to make the top of this tower look just a little bit off. State of Illinois leads the country in LEED certified buildings, which is why Chicago is on its way to being one of the greenest cities in America, which is something we are very proud of. Our Turning Basket Bridge is like a giant seesaw. However much steel, you have a one from the Art Institute, the Adler Planetarium. I've seen theater, I've seen dance. It's really cool. Happens every night after sundown. So I think it's about 9:30. You can come down to this lovely river walk here, bring a little picnic, I recommend that part, and enjoy some art on the bar. It's a fun activity for the whole family, and it is free activity for the whole family. Now a little bit more about this beautiful river here. Nowadays, the typically rivers share nearly 80 species of fish, and you can fish in the river, so just like Chicago is resilient, so too are its fish. On your right, you've got that glass building with those white pillars. That is 111 West Wacker. 111 is a residential tower. And just to give you a sense of what rent is like in the Loop, I looked at the other day. The cheapest, smallest studio in that building is about $2,500 a month. And and only goes up from there the more space and bedrooms you add. So I was trying to say, you know, for Chicago standards, living alone can be a little more on the pricier end of things, but the great thing about Chicago is we have so many amazing neighborhoods to live in. We really are a city of neighborhoods. There are 77 defined community areas in Chicago, and even more neighborhoods. And so if you're at all curious about the Reed Murdoch Center is the closest thing we have to the river to a style called Prairie style. Prairie style, popularized by Frank Lloyd Wright, meant to mimic the horizon-hugging plains and prairies of the Midwest. So the hints you see here are the long, flat lines, super wide windows, and the red, organic, earthy color of the building. Whenever I see a prairie-style building, I just imagine the horizon of the prairie and mellow out. It's a very relaxing style to look at. Architecture, it can affect your mood. The way the buildings are shaped, style, can affect how you're feeling and sort of seep into your psyche. So coming up on your right is going to be a not so relaxing style. You look at that short, stout, angry looking building right there, 55 West Wacker. 55 is a style called brutalism. Brutalism is nothing but raw, rough concrete, like modernism on steroids, nothing but a jacked up, exposed exoskeleton on the building. This was a style for the late 1960s. You can see it in banks, courthouses, public universities. You must see it over here on your left in Marina City, the Corncob Towers. These are technically brutalist as well, because they do have this all concrete exterior. So not all brutalism is quite so brutal looking. You know, they have their beauty as well. Just have to find it, you know? Coming up next is the gold gilded topper on it. That is formerly the carbide and carbon building, now known as the Prairie Hotel. The Prairie Hotel. I love this building for one thing. The closer you get to it, the more sort of exquisite the detail and the gold becomes. If you're wearing sunglasses, I recommend taking them down for just a second just to check out the gleam of the gold. Now, I also love this building because people say that the building is built to resemble the top of a champagne bottle. And that's because that building was built at the height of prohibition of alcohol in the US in the late 1920s. So people think it was this kind of sneaky little architectural protest. There's real gold bleeding into sunlight, but it's only about half as thick as saran wrap, 1/5000th of an inch. Super, super, super thin. Behind that is the Two Prudential Plaza, that pointy spire building that might remind you of the Chrysler building in New York City, Liberty Place in Philadelphia, if either of those happen to be familiar to you. Sort of a classic late 80s metal glass angular building. And coming up next on your right, I always like to point out a fun spot to grab a drink. Coming up on your right, you've got London House. London House has a world-renowned rooftop bar. Highly recommend the London House rooftop bar. Great views, great drinks. It's a little expensive, I'm not gonna lie about that. But we have a lot of rooftop bars downtown. We love a rooftop. When it's warm in Chicago, everyone just loves being outside. So it is cold here many months of the year. So we have lots of rooftops. That's definitely one of the cool ones. Also, I love Cindy's. Cindy's on Michigan Avenue, another good rooftop. Straight ahead though, this Wrigley building once more with that Spanish-style cathedral. Behind that Spanish cathedral is another European cathedral building in the Chicago Tribune Tower. The Trib Tower is a style called French Gothic Revival, so called because it was modeled after a 13th century cathedral in France. So the Gothic features you see here are those flying buttresses. Those are the right angles, the bridges to form the ornamental crown of the building. They're called flying buttresses.
So guys, we just had a boat ride and it was fun. It took us like 1 hour 40 minutes. Yes, 40 minutes. So man, those buildings are super gorgeous.
Si es por acá,
So this is the boat.
es por acá.
So guys, that's our ride. Seaside. That's our tour van.
Thank you. We loved it.
The long one. Oh, how do we close it? Okay.
I just pushed the button. You should go back.
Oh, okay.
Already. Are in like the neighborhoods.
So I will say, Chicago is the most segregated city in the United States, which is a bad thing, obviously, but also a really great thing to a certain extent because every neighborhood has like a food and cultural specialty.
Oh.
So if I go to Pilsen, I know I'm gonna get great tacos. If I go to like North London or certain areas that are like Southwest, I can get some great chicken wings. That's where the black people are.
Oh.
I know different neighborhoods are gonna bring me different great foods. And so that is sort of the bummer of it. But you know where to go to find good things. For sure.
It's not segregated in the sense that you can't go there or people from there can't go here. It's more like it might take a while to get to those places from there.
Which the around the O'Hare Airport? That is east or south?
That's north.
North?
It's northwest,
Okay, yeah, that's where we at.
That's where our
That's where
hotel
your hotel
is.
is?
Yes.
Okay.
Have you been to Giuliano?
Where's Giuliano?
Giordano's?
Oh, Giordano's.
Yeah, Giordano's is good for deep dish pizza if that's what you like.
I'd recommend Malnati's over here.
Malnati's is definitely way better.
Yes, it is. Then you want that to be your first experience with deep dish pizza.
Yeah.
Oh.
Giordano's is really cheesy. That's all I will say. They're consistently very cheesy.
Good prices.
Malnati's is where it's at. There's a place in Irving Park called Smokes. It's a barbecue place, but it's really good. They also do like Southern comfort food, so mac and cheese and greens and things like that. I like the chicken up north, but the barbecue place is like close. It'll be good food for sure.
Most of the chicken places up north are like chain restaurants, like
Yeah.
Chick-fil-A or Popeyes.
What's
I'm here from the today.
Oh,
And we had to hire
Uber? Took a Uber, yeah.
You guys have services there? The first one.
Yeah, the first hotel we cancelled it. It
And
was
we
like
found
1 hour away.
It was near past.
Yeah.
It's too far.
and me, this is my first time being in Chicago, so I was like, oh, okay. I didn't
Chicago on
confirm.
anything. They really will.
Actually, where we're going, the Sears Tower is actually like really close to the expressway you would use to get to. Apartment. Nobody parks their car by themselves. They actually have special valets that do it for them.